The fluorescent lights of Sterling Corp felt harsher than usual as Jason Miller walked out of Mr. Henderson's office. The air in the hallway, typically buzzing with the low hum of productivity and polite chatter, seemed thick and heavy, pressing down on his shoulders. His briefcase felt unnaturally light, a mere shell containing the formal letter that confirmed his new reality. Redundancy. Not even performance-related, just a corporate restructuring, a shifting of priorities, a decision made by people far away, impacting lives they would never know. Jason, a loyal employee for 15 years, a man who had always believed in the steady ascent of a diligent career, was suddenly abruptly at a standstill. His mind felt strangely calm, detached. He processed the words, difficult decision, valued contribution, severance package, but they didn't seem to connect with the image of the life he had built, a comfortable home in the suburbs, a reliable car, the promise of future stability, and, at the center of it all, Sarah, his wife of 10 years, Sarah whose laughter could fill a room, whose presence felt like the anchor that kept him grounded. He pictured telling her, the inevitable concern in her eyes, but followed by the quiet strength, the shared belief that they would navigate this together. That was the foundation of their partnership, wasn't it? The unconditional support, the in sickness and in health for richer or for poorer vow that felt less like a formality and more like the fundamental truth of their bond. He truly believed that. He believed in her, in them. The walk to the parking lot was a blur. The familiar sights of his daily commute, the bustling coffee shop on the corner, the old oak tree in the park, the constant flow of traffic, all seemed slightly distorted, viewed through a lens of unreality. He got into his car, the worn leather of the steering wheel familiar under his hands, but the feeling of routine was gone. It was replaced by a void, a sudden, terrifying emptiness where his future used to be meticulously planned. He sat there for a long time, the engine off, the silence of the car a stark contrast to the noise of the city outside. He should call Sarah. He should go home. But a strange inertia held him captive. He found himself replaying the conversation with Henderson, searching for signs he had missed, for a hint of warning. There had been none, just the cold corporate logic of efficiency models and cost reduction. He was a number, an entry on a spreadsheet that had been deemed expendable. The sun began to dip below the horizon as he finally started the engine. The drive home was slow, each mile stretching out, the weight of the news growing heavier with every turn. He rehearsed the words in his head, how to break it gently, how to reassure her when he felt so profoundly unsure himself. He parked the car in the driveway, the house looking warm and inviting, lights glowing softly in the windows. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, to project a strength he didn't feel. He opened the front door, the familiar scent of Sarah's cooking, maybe roasted chicken, his favorite, wafting towards him. "Sarah, I'm home," he called out, his voice sounding a little strained even to his own ears. She came into the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, a bright smile on her face. "Hey, you're late. Everything okay? Dinner's almost ready." He looked at her easy smile, the warmth in her eyes, and the words caught in his throat. How could he shatter this domestic peace? He forced a smile back. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just a long day." He needed a moment. He needed to gather his thoughts, to find the right words. He couldn't just blurt it out like some kind of disaster announcement. He went through the motions of his evening routine, hanging up his coat, putting his briefcase down, carefully hiding the ominous letter inside, washing his hands. Dinner was pleasant, filled with Sarah's usual cheerful chatter about her day, a funny story about a colleague, plans for the weekend. He contributed sparingly, his mind miles away, wrestling with the impending conversation. Sarah seemed not to notice his subdued mood, or perhaps she attributed it to a typical stressful day at work. He let her believe that for a little while longer, there lay a small temporary shield against the inevitable truth. After dinner, as they were clearing the table, he knew he couldn't postpone it any longer. He led her to the living room, the one they had painstakingly decorated together, filled with shared memories, photos on the mantelpiece, the comfortable sofa where they curled up to watch movies. He sat down, and she sat opposite him, a questioning look on her face now. His earlier attempts at feigning normalcy must have failed. "Sarah," he started, his voice low, I need to tell you something." Her smile faded, replaced by a flicker of concern. "Jason, what is it? Are you okay?" He nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm okay, but it's about work." He paused, searching for the least painful way to phrase it. There was a restructuring. At Sterling, he saw the anticipation in her eyes, the subtle tension in her shoulders. They let me go, Sarah. The words were out, blunt, ugly, final. The silence that followed was deafening. The hopeful anticipation in her eyes vanished, replaced by, not concern, not even pity, but something colder, something he couldn't immediately identify. Her expression became guarded, her features hardening almost imperceptibly. "Let you go?" she repeated, her voice flat. "You mean you're fired?" "Redundant," he corrected, almost mechanically. "My position was made redundant. It wasn't my performance, it was—" "It doesn't matter why, Jason," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "You lost your job, just like that? After 15 years? He flinched at her tone. It wasn't the reaction he had envisioned. Where was the shared strength, the "we're in this together" spirit? "It was sudden," he explained, trying to keep his own voice steady. "I got the letter today. There's a severance package. It'll give us some time to figure things out. I'll start looking immediately. My experience, I'm sure I can find something else." He saw her gaze sweep around the room, taking in their comfortable surroundings, the nice furniture, the expensive electronics, the signs of their comfortable middle-class life. Her lips thinned into a tight line. "Figure things out," she said, her voice dangerously quiet now. "Jason, how are we going to figure things out? The mortgage, the bills? Our savings aren't exactly limitless, especially not enough to cover everything indefinitely." He was taken aback by the immediate, practical nature of her response. He had expected emotional support, a moment of shared vulnerability, a plan forged from mutual trust. Instead, he was met with financial anxiety and a disconcerting lack of empathy for him, the one who had just received the blow. "Sarah, we have enough to manage for a while," he insisted, trying to sound confident. "And I'm not going to stop looking until I find something. It might even be an opportunity to do something different. Something different," she scoffed, the coldness in her eyes intensifying. "Like what, Jason? You're 50 years old. Your industry is consolidating. What kind of opportunity do you think is just waiting for you out there?" His chest tightened. Her words felt like a physical blow. They were harsh, dismissive, and utterly devoid of the support he desperately needed. This wasn't the Sarah he thought he knew. This was a stranger, looking at him not with love or concern, but with calculating fear and what looked suspiciously like disappointment, maybe even contempt. "I don't know yet," he admitted, the hope draining out of him. "But I'll find something. I have to." She stood up then, her movements abrupt, breaking the intimate space between them. She walked over to the window, her back to him, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" she said, her voice flat, directed at the window pane more than at him. "Everything we planned, everything we worked for. It's a setback, Sarah, not the end of the world," he pleaded, standing up as well. "We'll get through this, together." She turned around slowly, her expression unreadable, devoid of the warmth that had always been there. "Together," she repeated, the word sounding hollow and mocking in the quiet room. She looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw it then, the calculation, the weighing of options, and the clear, undeniable conclusion she was reaching. I need some time to think, Jason," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is a lot." He nodded, his heart sinking. "Okay, of course." He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to reassure her that they would face this as a team, but something in her posture, in the cold distance in her eyes, stopped him. She seemed miles away already, receding into a space he couldn't follow. He watched her walk out of the living room, the soft closing of the door echoing in the sudden silence. The house that had felt warm and inviting just moments ago now felt cold and vast. He was standing in the middle of his life, and the ground beneath him had just crumbled. The carefully constructed foundation of his belief in unconditional partnership felt like dust. He was alone with the shattering reality of his lost job and the growing, terrifying realization that the woman he loved might not be the anchor he thought she was. The fall had begun, not just professionally, but personally, and the depth of the drop was becoming chillingly clear. The days that followed Jason's revelation were shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence. Sarah's initial reaction had been a chilling prelude to her subsequent withdrawal. She didn't leave immediately, not physically, but her presence in the house became a ghost of what it had been. The easy conversation vanished, replaced by stilted interactions and carefully avoided eye contact. She moved through their shared space as if he were a stranger, or worse, an obstacle. The warmth was gone, replaced by a palpable tension that made every shared moment feel like walking on thin ice. Jason tried to bridge the gap. He attempted to talk about the future, about potential job leads, scarce as they were in the initial shock, about ways they could manage financially. He even suggested cutting back on expenses, proposing simple changes to their lifestyle. But his words seemed to bounce off an invisible wall she had erected between them. She would listen impassively, offer brief, non-committal responses, or simply change the subject. Her silence was not reflective, it was dismissive. It was the silence of someone who had already made up their mind. He saw her on her phone more often, her conversations hushed, her expression unreadable. He tried not to pry, clinging to the hope that she was discussing options with a friend, seeking advice on how to navigate this crisis together. But a cold dread began to creep in, a primal fear that gnawed at his gut. The woman he had vowed to cherish, the one he believed would stand by him unconditionally, seemed to be actively distancing herself just when he needed her the most. One evening, he found her in the spare room packing a suitcase. The sight sent a jolt of panic through him. "Sarah, what are you doing?" His voice was barely a whisper. She didn't look up, her movements precise and efficient as she folded clothes. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while," she said, her tone flat, devoid of apology or explanation. "Stay with your sister? Why? Are you leaving?" The words were absurd, unthinkable, yet they were forming in his mind. She finally stopped packing and turned to face him. Her eyes were cold, hard. Any trace of the woman he loved seemed to have been carefully erased. "Jason, this isn't working," she stated, her voice steady and emotionless. "This situation, you losing your job, it's not what I signed up for." He stared at her, stunned into silence. "Not what you signed up for," he repeated, the disbelief plain on his face. "Sarah, we're married. This is life. Things happen. We handle them together." "Handle them? How?" she challenged, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. "You have no job, no prospects that I can see. How are we going to pay the bills? Live the life we had? The life I want?" "I'll find something," he insisted, the desperation rising in his chest. "It might take time, yes, but I'm capable. I have experience." "Time we don't have," she cut him off. I can't deal with this uncertainty, Jason, with you being like this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing his current state. Unemployed, worried, vulnerable. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This wasn't about finances, not entirely. It was about him, about his perceived failure, about his inability to provide the security she demanded. He wasn't the stable, successful man she had married anymore. In her eyes, he was diminished, and that was unacceptable. "So, you're just walking away?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I need space," she said, avoiding the word leaving. It was a convenient euphemism for abandonment. To think, to figure things out. The same phrase he had used, now weaponized against him. "While I'm dealing with losing everything?" He couldn't help but ask, the unfairness of it all hitting him with full force. She sighed, an impatient sound. "It's not about you, not completely. It's about me, too. My security, my future." His security? His future? What about theirs? What about the life they had built together? It seemed in this moment that together had always been conditional, dependent on his ability to maintain a certain status quo. "Sarah, please," he pleaded, reaching a hand out towards her. "Don't do this. We can get through this. We will." She stepped back, out of reach. "I'm sorry, Jason. I just can't. Not right now." She zipped up the suitcase, her eyes still avoiding his direct gaze. "I'll be in touch." And that was it. No tears, no grand arguments, no dramatic declarations of heartbreak. Just a quiet, efficient packing of bags and a cold, measured withdrawal. She picked up the suitcase, walked past him, and out the front door. He heard the click of the latch, the fading sound of her car driving away, and then silence. A profound, aching silence that filled the entire house, pressing in on him from all sides. He stood in the empty spare room, the lingering scent of her perfume, a cruel reminder of her departed presence. He walked back to the living room. The space that had felt full of life just moments before dinner on that fateful night now felt like a cavern. He sat on the sofa, the same sofa where they had shared countless moments of intimacy and comfort, and stared blankly ahead. He had lost his job, the foundation of his professional identity. Now he had lost his wife, the cornerstone of his personal life, the person he believed would be his unwavering support. The double blow was devastating. leaving him adrift in a sea of uncertainty and pain. The man who believed in the enduring power of love and loyalty felt like a fool. The unconditional bond he thought they shared had proven to be conditional after all, contingent on his financial stability and perceived success. The silence of the house was deafening. Every object, every picture on the wall, every piece of furniture seemed to mock him with memories of a life that was now fractured, possibly beyond repair. He was alone, stripped of his professional status and his marital partnership, left with nothing but the echoing silence and the gnawing pain of betrayal. He didn't cry. Not then. The shock was too profound, the numbness too complete. He just sat there, immobile, the weight of his sudden, absolute loss pressing him down. The comfortable home felt like a cage, the walls closing in. He was trapped in the aftermath of a life that had imploded. The debris of his assumptions and beliefs scattered around him. The hours bled into one another. Darkness fell, and he didn't bother turning on the lights. He stayed on the sofa, a solitary figure in the gloom, the silence of the empty house amplifying the silence within him. His mind struggled to process the magnitude of what had happened. How could someone he loved so deeply, trusted so completely, just leave when he was at his lowest point? It defied everything he understood about partnership, about commitment, about love. He thought about the future, and a vast, terrifying emptiness stretched before him. No job, no wife, no clear path forward, just a void. The feeling of being utterly alone, abandoned precisely when he needed support the most, was a corrosive acid eating away at his soul. He had hit rock bottom, not just professionally, but emotionally, personally. The comfortable, predictable world he inhabited had crumbled, leaving him standing in the ruins, unsure how to take the next step. The silence of the house was the sound of his broken world. The silence in the house became Jason's constant companion. After Sarah left, the space didn't just feel empty. It felt haunted by the echoes of a life that was no longer there. He moved through the rooms like a ghost himself, performing basic functions, eating simple meals, showering, sleeping fitfully, but with a profound sense of detachment. The pain of her departure wasn't a sharp, agonizing ache. It was a deep, pervasive numbness that made the world feel muted and unreal. He tried in the beginning to maintain some semblance of his old routine. He would wake up at his usual time, make coffee, sit at his desk with his laptop open, ostensibly searching for jobs. But the words on the screen blurred. The task felt insurmountable, and the silence of the house was a constant reminder of the life he had lost, the life he was now failing to reclaim. The motivation withered, choked by the weight of his despair, and the chilling knowledge that the person he relied on most had abandoned him when he needed her. The job search quickly devolved into aimless scrolling. He would start on professional networking sites, then drift to news articles about the economy, mostly depressing, then to social media. Seeing updates from former colleagues felt like a cruel joke, and finally, inevitably, to darker corners of the internet. It was in one of these moments of profound aimlessness and emotional void that he stumbled upon it, the world of online casinos. He wasn't a gambler, never had been. His life had been built on stability, predictability, calculated risks in the business world, not random chance. But the banner ad flashing brightly on the screen promised escape. It promised excitement, a chance to forget, even for a few minutes, the crushing weight of his reality. It offered a different kind of numbers game than the spreadsheets he was used to, one where fortune, not diligence, dictated the outcome. And in his current state, fortune seemed a more appealing deity than the indifferent forces that had governed his recent life. He clicked the link, a purely impulsive act, driven by boredom and a desperate need for distraction. The website that loaded was a riot of color and sound, a stark contrast to the muted grayness of his emotional landscape. Flashing lights, spinning wheels, the promise of instant wins. It was a dazzling, artificial world, designed to lure you in and make you forget. He registered an account with a detached curiosity, using a small amount of money from his savings account, an amount he deemed expendable, a concept that felt bitterly ironic given his situation. He started with simple games, slot machines with their hypnotic spinning reels, and cheerful, albeit artificial, jingles. It was mindless, repetitive, and utterly absorbing. It required no thought, no strategy, just the simple click of a mouse button and the hopeful anticipation of a winning combination. For the first time in weeks, his mind wasn't solely focused on his lost job or Sarah's departure. It was occupied by the vibrant graphics, the potential for a payout, the simple binary outcome of win or lose. The small wins, when they occurred, provided a fleeting rush, a tiny spark of excitement in the overwhelming darkness. The losses, which were far more frequent, were easily dismissed. He had already lost so much. What was a little more money compared to the void in his life? He found himself spending hours at a time in this digital sanctuary. The online casino was always open, always available, a constant escape from the silence of his house and the turmoil in his mind. He could play at 3 a.m., wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. There were no judging eyes, no disappointed sighs, no reminders of his failures. It was just him and the endless possibility of the next spin, the next hand, the next roll of the dice. The silence he experienced in the casino wasn't the physical silence of his empty home. It was an internal silence. The noise and visual stimulation of the games drowned out the noise of his own thoughts, the constant loop of what if and why that tormented him when he was idle. The focus required, minimal as it was, kept his mind anchored in the present moment, preventing it from drifting back to the painful past or the terrifying future. He started experimenting with different games, blackjack, roulette, poker. He learned the basic rules, the different betting options. He wasn't trying to become a professional gambler. He was simply seeking distraction, a way to fill the endless hours and numb the pain. The small amounts he initially wagered grew slightly larger as his desperation for escape deepened. A win felt like a validation, a sign that maybe, just maybe, fortune hadn't completely abandoned him. A loss reinforced the familiar feeling of things not going his way, but in the context of the casino, it felt less personal, less devastating than losing his job or his wife. He kept his gambling a secret. It was a silent, solitary activity, hidden away from the world, much like the pain he carried. He didn't talk about it, didn't share his wins or losses with anyone. There was no one to share with anyway. Sarah was gone. His friends were mostly work acquaintances who had faded away after his redundancy, and his family lived far away, and he didn't want to burden them with the full extent of his collapse. The online casino was his private world, a place where he could exist without judgment, without expectation, without the crushing weight of his failures. The hours he spent online blurred into days. He neglected his appearance, his diet, his responsibilities. The job search became an afterthought, a task he would get to later. The severance package dwindled, slowly at first, then more quickly, as his bets increased slightly. He wasn't winning enough to offset his losses, not by a long shot, but the hope, the perpetual irrational hope that the next spin would be the big one, kept him going. He knew, intellectually, that this was a destructive path. He wasn't a fool. He had seen the cautionary tales, but the emotional void he felt was immense, and the online casino offered a temporary, albeit artificial, balm. It was a refuge, a silent sanctuary where he could spin the wheel and forget, where the only relationship he had was with the random number generator and the flashing lights on the screen. The silence of his house was now filled with the phantom sounds of the online world, the digital clatter of coins, the whirring of the slot reels, the smooth voice of the virtual dealer. He was sinking deeper into the world of online gambling, not out of greed, but out of a profound, desperate loneliness and a need to escape the crushing reality of a life that had abruptly shattered, leaving him alone in the desolate silence. This was his new normal, a quiet descent into a hidden vice, fueled by the pain of abandonment and the emptiness of a future that had suddenly disappeared. The online casino became more than just a distraction. It became a way of life, albeit a solitary and unhealthy one. Jason's days and nights blurred into a continuous cycle centered around the glowing screen. He would wake up, make coffee, and within minutes be logged back into the site, the vibrant colors and inviting interfaces a stark contrast to the muted reality of his empty house. The routine was self-destructive, he knew, but it provided a structure, a purpose, however artificial, in a life that had otherwise lost all meaning. He delved deeper into the mechanics of the games. He wasn't just blindly clicking anymore. Driven by a faint, lingering spark of his former analytical mind, he started reading articles, watching videos, often interspersed with hours of actual gameplay, about strategies, odds, and probability. He learned about house edges, variants, and betting systems. This wasn't a logical pursuit aimed at guaranteed profit. It was a way to feel in control, to impose some semblance of order on a world built on randomness, mirroring his desperate need to regain control of his own chaotic life. He started playing games that required a degree of skill, or at least decision-making, beyond pure chance. Blackjack, video poker. He would sit for hours, analyzing hands, calculating odds, trying to minimize the house edge. The small intellectual challenge provided a different kind of escape than the mindless slots. It engaged a part of his brain that had been dormant since losing his job, a part that craved problem-solving and strategy. The emotional roller coaster of online gambling was intense. A winning streak, however small, would bring a rush of exhilaration, a fleeting sense of validation. It felt like a sign, a flicker of hope in the darkness, proof that he wasn't completely cursed, that maybe his luck was finally turning. He would imagine telling Sarah, showing her that he wasn't a failure, that he could still succeed. These fantasies were brief, quickly shattered by the inevitable losses that followed. A losing streak, on the other hand, would plunge him deeper into despair. The money, representing the last vestiges of his former stability, felt like it was being siphoned away, drop by agonizing drop. Frustration and self-recrimination would build, leading to impulsive decisions, chasing losses with larger bets, playing games he wasn't familiar with, staying online for even longer hours in a desperate attempt to recoup his losses. The silence of the house would become oppressive, filled only with the frantic clicking of his mouse and the sinking feeling in his gut. He learned to manage his emotions, not in a healthy way, but by becoming numb. The initial sharp pangs of disappointment with a loss were blunted by repeated exposure. The excitement of a win became less potent as he understood the underlying probabilities. He developed a detached, almost clinical relationship with the money he was losing. It was just numbers on a screen, abstract points in a game, not the tangible representation of his dwindling savings, his lost security. This emotional detachment was a defense mechanism, a way to survive the constant swings without being completely destroyed by them. His physical appearance deteriorated. He ate irregularly, slept poorly, and rarely left the house. The outside world felt distant and irrelevant. His social interactions were non-existent. He ignored calls from the few people who still checked in, concocting vague excuses about being busy. The online casino was his world, his community, of sorts, though interaction was minimal, his everything. There were moments of clarity, brief, terrifying flashes, where he saw himself for what he had become, a man lost in a digital haze, wasting his remaining resources and his life. He would look at his reflection in the darkened screen after closing the casino window, gaunt, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, and feel a wave of self-disgust. He would think of Sarah, not with longing for her return, but with a bitter understanding that she had seen this potential in him, or perhaps simply couldn't tolerate his vulnerability, and had fled. One particularly bleak morning, after losing a significant portion of his remaining funds in a reckless roulette session, he felt a familiar wave of despair wash over him. He closed the laptop, the sudden silence of the room louder than ever. He walked into the kitchen, the untouched dishes piled in the sink a testament to his neglect. He looked around the house, once a symbol of his success and happiness, now a dusty, silent shell reflecting his own internal state. He stood there for a long time, the weight of his situation crushing him. He had hit a new low, not just financially, but in terms of self-respect and hope. The online casino, his sanctuary, had become his prison. The escape it offered was temporary and ultimately destructive. He was spinning in a vicious cycle, losing money, losing time, losing himself. He stumbled back to the living room and sat down, staring at the laptop screen. It was an open portal to the world that was slowly consuming him. He could log back in, chase his losses, seek that fleeting rush of a potential win. Or he could stop. The thought was terrifying. Stopping meant facing the silence, facing the pain, facing the reality of his situation without the numbing distraction of the game. It meant confronting the loss of his job, the abandonment by his wife, the monumental task of rebuilding his life from scratch. It felt overwhelming, impossible. But as he sat there staring at the login screen, a different feeling began to stir within him. It was a flicker, small and weak, but undeniable, a spark of his former self, the rational, resilient man who had built a successful career and a comfortable life. He remembered the satisfaction of achieving something through hard work, the quiet pride of overcoming challenges. The artificial highs of the casino felt hollow and meaningless compared to those memories. He thought about the strategies he had studied, the understanding of probability he had gained. What if he applied that same analytical focus, that same intensity of learning, to something else? Something constructive? Something that could actually lead to rebuilding, not further destruction. The idea took root tentatively at first, then growing stronger. He could channel the energy he was pouring into gambling into something productive. He could use the internet not just to escape, but to learn, to grow, to find a new path. The prospect was daunting, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel entirely hopeless. He didn't log back into the casino that day. The urge was there, a persistent whisper in the back of his mind, but he resisted. He closed the lid of his laptop, plunging the screen into darkness. The silence returned, but this time it felt slightly different. It wasn't just the silence of despair, it was the silence of a decision made, a turning point reached. He didn't know what the next step would be, but he knew, with a sudden, quiet certainty, that it couldn't be another spin of the roulette wheel. The digital sanctuary had served its purpose, a dark, temporary refuge. Now it was time to leave the silence of the game behind and face the daunting, but potentially hopeful silence of rebuilding. The decision to step away from the online casino didn't come with a fanfare or a sudden burst of enlightenment. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, like the subtle turning of a ship at sea. It happened over a few agonizing days after that bleak morning when he stared at his reflection and felt the depth of his self-imposed prison. The urge to log back in remained potent, a persistent siren call promising temporary oblivion. His fingers would hover over the laptop, drawn by habit and the lingering fantasy of the big win that would magically fix everything. But the nascent spark of self-preservation, ignited in the depths of his despair, held him back. He spent hours simply sitting, sometimes staring at the wall, sometimes looking out the window at the world that had continued spinning without him. The silence of the house was no longer a canvas for the phantom sounds of the casino. It was just silence, raw and empty. In this quiet space, with no distractions, the reality of his situation pressed in. The dwindling bank account, the empty rooms, the photographs of a life that felt impossibly distant, and the memory of Sarah. Not just the pain of her leaving, but the cold pragmatism in her eyes, the clear message that his value was tied to his success. It was a bitter pill, but in the silence he could finally swallow it. He could acknowledge the conditional nature of the bond he had believed was unconditional. This painful acceptance was oddly liberating. It stripped away the last vestiges of romantic delusion and left him with a clear, albeit harsh, view of reality. If his worth was conditional, then his path forward couldn't rely on external validation, certainly not from someone who had already demonstrated the limits of her commitment. He had to find value within himself, build something that was inherently his, not dependent on anyone else's approval or presence. He started small. The first step away from the casino wasn't towards a grand new venture, but towards basic self-care. He cleaned the kitchen, tackling the pile of dishes with a quiet determination that surprised him. He showered, shaved, and put on clean clothes, simple acts that felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of himself. He ate a proper meal, sitting at the dining table instead of hunched over his laptop. These small victories against his own inertia were significant. They were physical manifestations of a shift taking place internally. Then he opened his laptop again. The urge to go to the casino site was still there, a well-worn path in his digital landscape, but he forced his fingers to type something else. He didn't know what he was looking for, not specifically. Information, opportunity, a sign. He started by searching for articles about rebuilding after job loss, about changing careers, about personal finance. His analytical mind, previously focused on optimizing blackjack strategy, began to engage with real-world problems. He found articles about in-demand skills, about online learning platforms, about starting small businesses. He read about people who had faced similar setbacks and managed to turn their lives around. These stories weren't about overnight success or winning the lottery. They were about resilience, perseverance, and strategic effort. They resonated with a part of him that the casino never could, the part that believed in earned success, in the power of knowledge and hard work. He started exploring online courses. There was a vast, overwhelming amount of information available. He felt a flicker of the intellectual curiosity that had driven him in his career. He thought about his skills, his analytical abilities, his experience in project management, his understanding of data. How could these be applied in a new context? What skills did he lack? What opportunities existed in areas he hadn't considered before? He spent days, then weeks immersed in this new kind of online exploration. He wasn't seeking escape anymore. He was seeking knowledge. The silence of his house was no longer a painful void, but a space for focused learning. He would sit for hours, watching video lectures, reading dense articles, taking notes. The quiet was conducive to concentration. There were no colleagues interrupting, no family demands, just the hum of his laptop and the flow of new information. He researched market trends, identified potential niches, and started to see patterns, opportunities where before there had only been despair. His mind, sharp and rational when not clouded by emotional turmoil and the allure of gambling, began to make connections, to formulate ideas. He thought about his experience at Sterling Corp, the inefficiencies he had observed, the services that businesses needed but often struggled to find. An idea began to form, small and tentative at first, then growing in clarity and potential. It was related to his previous field, but offered a new approach, a service he could provide independently, leveraging his years of experience without being dependent on a corporate structure. This was the beginning of his anti-fragility. The system, his career, his marriage had failed him, creating chaos and loss. But instead of being destroyed, he was starting to adapt, to grow stronger, not despite the shocks, but because of them. The pain of his loss wasn't gone, but it was being transmuted into motivation, into a fierce, quiet determination to rebuild on a foundation of his own making. He started outlining a business plan. It was a painstaking process, requiring research, analysis, and realistic assessment of challenges. He approached it with the same rigor he would have applied to a major project at Sterling Corp, but with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about making a living, it was about reclaiming his identity, proving to himself that he was capable, resilient, and independent. The silence in the house wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the quiet hum of his laptop, the rustle of papers, the soft click of his mouse as he worked. It was the sound of rebuilding, of a man finding his footing again, not through external support, but through internal strength and focused effort. He hadn't won a massive jackpot at the casino, but he had found something far more valuable in the quiet depths of his despair, the resolution to rely on himself and the silent strength to begin again. The journey was long and uncertain, but for the first time since the fall he was moving forward, guided by the quietude of his newfound resolve. The transition from the chaotic world of online gambling to the disciplined pursuit of knowledge was marked by a profound silence. It wasn't the desolate quiet of abandonment, but a focused, deliberate stillness. Jason dedicated himself to learning with an intensity he hadn't felt since his early career days, perhaps even more so, driven by a deep-seated need to prove his worth, not to others but to himself. His days became structured around online courses, industry webinars, and exhaustive research. He woke up early, his mind clear from the absence of late-night gambling sessions. He would make coffee and settle at his desk, a space that had been unused for weeks, now transformed into his command center. The laptop, once a portal to mindless escape, was now a tool for strategic reconstruction. He immersed himself in subjects that were adjacent to his previous expertise, but offered new avenues. Data analysis, digital marketing, project management software, online business models. He devoured information like a man starved. He took copious notes, filling notebooks with diagrams, key concepts, and potential applications. The process was slow and demanding, often frustrating, but the quiet satisfaction of learning, of feeling his mind engage and expand, was a powerful antidote to the emptiness he had felt. The silence in the house facilitated his focus. There were no interruptions, no external demands on his time or energy. He could spend hours wrestling with a complex topic, rewinding lectures, rereading articles, until the concept clicked into place. This quiet solitude, which had once been oppressive, now felt like a necessary condition for his intellectual rebirth. He was rebuilding himself piece by piece, in the stillness of his own space. His idea for a new venture began to take more concrete shape. Drawing on his years of experience in project management and process optimization within corporations, he saw a need for a streamlined, efficient consulting service for small to medium-sized businesses that couldn't afford large consulting firms. He envisioned a service that leveraged technology to deliver high-value solutions remotely, cutting down on overhead and making expertise accessible. This wasn't a sudden epiphany. It was the result of weeks of research and contemplation in the quiet. He analyzed market gaps, identified potential clients, and started developing a service offering. He spent hours drafting a business plan, detailing his services, target market, pricing strategy, and financial projections. This document became his roadmap, a tangible representation of his aspirations. The process was fraught with challenges. There were moments of doubt, when the scale of the task seemed overwhelming and the fear of failure loomed large. He would remember the comfort of the casino, the simple escape it offered, and the temptation to retreat would surface. But he would look at his notes, at the growing business plan, and the quiet resolve within him would reassert itself. He had chosen the path of difficulty, the path of real-world engagement, and he wouldn't turn back. He started building a simple website, learning the basics of web design and content creation. He wrote articles about project management best practices, positioning himself as a knowledgeable expert. He reached out to former colleagues, carefully selecting those he trusted and who knew his capabilities before his fall, for advice and potential leads, explaining his new direction with quiet confidence, omitting the darker details of his recent past. The silence of his vigils, late nights spent studying, early mornings spent planning, was a testament to his dedication. He wasn't seeking validation or applause. He was driven by an internal fire, a quiet determination to prove to himself that he could overcome adversity and create something meaningful. The pain of Sarah's departure and the humiliation of his job loss hadn't broken him. They had, in a strange and difficult way, refined him. They had stripped away his dependence on external factors and forced him to look inward for strength and purpose. He wasn't the same man who had walked out of Sterling Corp that day. The outward markers of success were gone, replaced by a quiet intensity and a deep understanding of resilience. The man who had believed in unconditional love had learned the harsh lesson of its rarity. But the man who had fallen into the silent void of gambling had found his way out, not through a miraculous rescue, but through his own deliberate effort in the quietude of his home. He started reaching out to potential clients, sending out proposals, networking online. The first few rejections were disheartening, but he didn't dwell on them. He analyzed the feedback, refined his approach, and kept going. He was building something from the ground up, brick by silent brick. The first client was a small manufacturing company that needed help optimizing their production process. The project was challenging, requiring all of his analytical skills and problem-solving abilities. He poured himself into it, working long hours, often late into the night, the house silent around him. The satisfaction of delivering results, of seeing his efforts translate into tangible improvements for the client, was immense. It was a different kind of rush than the fleeting highs of the casino, a deeper, more lasting sense of accomplishment. Slowly, painstakingly, his new venture began to gain traction. Referrals came in, projects became larger, and his confidence grew. The financial worries didn't disappear overnight, but they lessened with each successful project, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of earning his way back. He was rebuilding more than just his finances and his career. He was rebuilding his identity. He was no longer defined by what he had lost, but by what he was creating. He was the man who had faced ruin and decided, quietly and determinedly, to build something new from the wreckage. The silent vigils of study and planning had paid off, transforming the quiet house from a tomb of despair into a workshop of reconstruction. He was still Jason Miller, but a stronger, more resilient version, forged in the silence of his struggle. As Jason's new consulting business grew, so too did his sense of self. The quiet focus that had defined his period of intense learning now translated into the disciplined execution of his business plan. The silence of his home was no longer just the backdrop to his solitary work. It became intrinsically linked with the forging of his new identity. He was building something substantial, and he was doing it on his own terms, in the deliberate quiet he had cultivated. He started structuring his days with the precision of a project manager. Mornings were for focused client work and business development. Afternoons were dedicated to research, refining his processes, and working on his website and online content. Evenings, once reserved for escaping into the digital casino or staring into the void, were now spent reviewing contracts, planning for the next day, or continuing his studies on new software and industry trends. The work was demanding, requiring long hours and intense concentration. There were no colleagues to bounce ideas off of, no superiors to provide direction. Every decision, every challenge he faced alone in the quiet of his house. This solitude, initially a source of pain, had become a source of strength, It forced him to rely on his own judgment, to trust his instincts, and to develop a deep well of self-reliance. He learned to manage his finances meticulously, a stark contrast to the reckless abandon of his gambling days. Every invoice, every expense, was tracked and accounted for. He set aside funds for taxes, for business development, and for savings. The money he earned felt different than his previous salary. It felt earned, directly tied to his effort and expertise. It wasn't just income, it was validation of his capability, a tangible representation of his rebuilding process. His initial clients were small, but their success stories provided powerful testimonials. Word of mouth spread slowly, but surely. He refined his online presence, his articles gaining traction, establishing him as a thoughtful and effective consultant. He discovered a quiet satisfaction in helping other businesses solve their problems, in applying his skills in a way that generated real value. The physical space of his home also began to reflect his transformation. The neglect of the past was replaced by order and care. He cleaned regularly, cooked healthy meals, and even started incorporating physical exercise into his routine, a simple walk around the neighborhood in the quiet mornings or evenings. These small acts of self-care were not just about physical well-being. They were about respecting himself, the man who was actively working to rebuild his life. He was still a silent man, not given to outward displays of emotion or seeking external validation. His victories were quiet, celebrated internally with a sense of hard-earned satisfaction. His setbacks, when they occurred, were analyzed rationally, lessons learned, and adjustments made without public complaint or self-pity. The anti-fragility that had begun to emerge was now a defining characteristic. The challenges he faced in building his business didn't break him. They forced him to adapt, to innovate, to become more resourceful and resilient. The thought of Sarah rarely consumed him with the same intensity it once had. The raw pain of her departure had receded, replaced by a quiet understanding of the circumstances. He didn't hate her, nor did he pine for her return. He simply understood that their connection had been conditional, a partnership based on shared comfort and stability, not on enduring loyalty through hardship. This understanding, reached in the long, silent hours of his rebuilding, was a crucial part of his growth. He no longer idealized love. He saw it as a choice, a commitment that required active effort from both parties, especially when faced with adversity. His silence also reflected a newfound inner peace. He wasn't seeking external noise to drown out internal turmoil. He was comfortable in his own company, content with the quiet rhythm of his work and the steady progress he was making. The validation he sought came from within, from completing a challenging project, from mastering a new skill, from seeing his business grow through his own efforts. He was earning not just money but respect from his clients, from the few former colleagues he was now working with in a new capacity, and most importantly, from himself. This respect was a consequence of his actions, his resilience, his unwavering commitment to rebuilding his life on a foundation of integrity and hard work. It was a stark contrast to the fleeting artificial wins of the casino, which had provided no lasting value or self-respect. As his business thrived, he started to feel a sense of control and stability he hadn't felt even when he was employed at Sterling Corp. He wasn't dependent on a single employer, subject to the whims of corporate restructuring. His success was a direct result of his own skills, his own effort, his own resilience. This was a profound shift in his perspective and his identity. The house that had felt like a lonely tomb was now a testament to his fortitude. It was a space where a man had faced the complete collapse of his life and, in the silence, had found the strength and clarity to rebuild himself from the ground up. He had gone through the fire of loss and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, clearer, and forged into a new, anti-fragile version of himself. His identity was no longer tied to a job title or a marital status. It was built on the solid ground of his own resilience and the quiet power of self-reliance. Months turned into a year, then 2. Jason's consulting business was not just surviving, it was flourishing. The steady stream of projects had grown into a reliable flow, and he had even hired a part-time virtual assistant to help manage administrative tasks. His income now significantly exceeded his previous salary at Sterling Corp, and he had not only replenished his savings, but had also begun making strategic investments. The financial anxieties that had plagued him after losing his job were a distant memory, replaced by a quiet confidence in his ability to generate income and manage his resources. The stability he had achieved was not a return to the comfortable predictability of his old life. It was something more robust, built on a foundation of earned success and self-reliance. He wasn't just employed, he was an entrepreneur, the architect of his own professional destiny. This distinction was crucial to his newfound identity. He understood now that true security came not from relying on external structures, but from cultivating internal resilience and capability. His daily routine remained disciplined and focused, a testament to the habits he had forged in the quiet intensity of his rebuilding phase. He still preferred the silence of his home office, finding that it allowed him to concentrate and work efficiently. The external world, with its noise and distractions, felt less compelling than the quiet satisfaction of his work. He maintained a small, trusted network, a few key clients who had become more like partners, a couple of professional contacts he could confide in, and his virtual assistant, with whom he had a purely professional, though respectful, relationship. His social life remained quiet, a deliberate choice. The need for constant external stimulation or validation had faded. He found contentment in his work, his learning, and the simple rhythm of his self-sufficient life. He had contemplated moving, selling the house that held so many bittersweet memories, but ultimately he decided against it. The house, once a symbol of his lost life, had become a symbol of his resilience. It was within these walls that he had fallen, faced his despair, and quietly rebuilt himself. It was his forge, his sanctuary of transformation. Living there felt like a quiet affirmation of his journey, a constant reminder of how far he had come. He had redecorated subtly, creating a space that felt more aligned with his current, focused self, minimalist, organized, functional. He continued to invest in his own learning, taking advanced courses, attending virtual conferences, and staying abreast of the latest developments in his field. The intellectual challenge remained a source of satisfaction, a continuous process of growth that fed his anti-fragility. He wasn't afraid of change or disruption. He saw them as opportunities to adapt, to learn, to evolve. Financially secure and professionally fulfilled, he also began to address other aspects of his well-being. He continued his exercise routine, prioritized healthy eating, and made sure to get enough rest. He started reading for pleasure again, books on history, philosophy, and science, subjects that expanded his perspective beyond the immediate demands of his business. He reflected often in the quiet evenings after work on the journey he had taken. The loss of his job had been devastating, the abandonment by Sarah a profound trauma, but he could see now with clear eyes how those experiences had forced him to confront his assumptions about life, love, and security. He had learned the hard way that external pillars could crumble, that people could walk away when faced with difficulty. But he had also learned that internal strength, resilience, and the willingness to rebuild were constants he could rely on. He no longer blamed Sarah, nor did he carry the bitterness that had consumed him in the immediate aftermath of her departure. He understood her choice, pragmatic and self-preserving though it was. It simply revealed the true nature of their bond, which was not the unconditional love he had idealized, but a partnership that was implicitly dependent on favorable circumstances. The pain had morphed into a quiet acceptance, a realistic understanding of human nature and relationships. His view of love had changed. It was no longer a passive state of feeling or an assumed permanence based on vows. It was an active choice, a commitment that required effort, empathy, and unwavering support, especially during times of hardship. He hadn't experienced that kind of love from Sarah, and that realization had been devastating. But it had also cleared the path for a more realistic and mature understanding of what a truly supportive partnership would entail should he ever seek one again. Respect, on the other hand, he had learned was not a given, but a consequence. It was earned through action, through integrity, through resilience and capability. He had lost respect when he lost his job and his sense of direction. He had earned it back, quietly and diligently, through his focused effort and the successful rebuilding of his life. His clients respected his expertise and reliability. His professional contacts respected his acumen and resilience. And most importantly, he respected himself. He stood firm on the plumb line of his newly found stability. It wasn't built on the shifting sands of external validation or conditional relationships, but on the solid ground of his own resilience, capability, and self-respect. The quiet man who had lost everything had found his way back, not to where he was, but to a stronger, more centered place. He was at peace with the silence, comfortable in his own skin and ready, though not actively seeking for whatever the future might hold, confident in his ability to handle it. He had faced the storm and built a ship that could weather any future squalls, not by avoiding them, but by being anti-fragile, capable of becoming stronger from the impact. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, nestled among client inquiries and industry newsletters. Jason skimmed through it, his eyes catching a familiar name in the sender field, Sarah Miller. For a split second, his breath hitched. It had been almost 2 years since he had last heard from her, 2 years since she had walked out, leaving him alone in the ruins of his life. He hadn't sought contact and she hadn't initiated it. The silence between them had been absolute. His initial reaction wasn't the surge of emotion he might have expected years ago. No desperate hope, no overwhelming pain. Instead, it was a quiet curiosity, tinged with a healthy dose of caution. He felt a distant echo of the hurt, but it was muted, overlaid by the hard-won peace and stability of his current life. He opened the email. The subject line was simple. "Hello, Jason." The body of the message was brief, almost tentative. Sarah expressed hope that he was doing well, and mentioned that she had heard things were looking up for him. She suggested they meet for coffee, to catch up. There was no apology, no explanation for her long silence, just a casual request to reconnect, phrased as if they had simply lost touch rather than experienced a profound, painful separation. Jason leaned back in his chair, the quiet of his office amplifying the beat of his own heart. He reread the email, analyzing the words, the tone. Heard things were looking up. That phrase stood out, a stark indicator of her motivation. She hadn't reached out when he was struggling, when he was lost in despair and the silent world of gambling. She was reaching out now when his success was, apparently, becoming known. He felt no immediate urge to reply. He closed the email and turned back to his work. He had a client proposal to finish, a complex problem that required his full attention. He found that focusing on his work was the most effective way to process the unexpected contact. The quiet discipline he had cultivated served him well, allowing him to set aside the emotional implications and approach the situation rationally. He spent the rest of the day engaged in his business, the email a small, distant echo in the background. In the evening, as he prepared dinner, he allowed himself to think about it more deeply. Why now? The answer seemed obvious, and it reinforced the lesson he had learned. Her interest was tied to his circumstances. She had left when he had nothing, and she was reappearing now that he had something again. It was a confirmation, albeit a painful one, of the conditional nature of her attachment. He decided to respond, not immediately, not with eagerness, but with a measured, neutral tone. He waited a day, giving himself space to formulate his reply without emotion clouding his judgment. His response was polite, brief, and non-committal. He acknowledged receiving her email, confirmed that his business was doing well, and said he was busy with work, but would consider a brief meeting if their schedules aligned in the coming weeks. He offered no warmth, no reminiscence, just a cool, detached acknowledgement. Her reply was prompt, suggesting a specific cafe near her sister's place, a subtle reminder of where she had gone. Jason checked his schedule. He had a gap late the following week. He agreed, setting a time and date, keeping the tone professional and brief. The arrangement was made with the efficiency of scheduling a business meeting, devoid of the emotional charge such an encounter might normally carry. The day of the meeting arrived. Jason felt a quiet tension, not apprehension, but a sense of bracing himself. He chose his clothes carefully, a smart, understated blazer, a crisp shirt, not an attempt to impress, but a quiet presentation of the man he had become, professional, capable, put together. He arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, securing a quiet table in the corner. He ordered a black coffee and waited, observing the casual bustle of the afternoon crowd. He felt calm, centered, grounded in his own reality. This wasn't a man returning to plead or to seek reconciliation. This was a man meeting someone from a past life, someone who had played a significant, albeit painful role in his transformation. He saw her walk in. She looked much the same, perhaps a little older, her expression carrying a mix of uncertainty and forced cheerfulness. She spotted him and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jason," she said, approaching the table, "it's good to see you." He stood up, offering a polite, reserved smile. "Sarah, you too." She sat down opposite him, and for a moment there was an awkward silence. She seemed to be studying him, perhaps noticing the quiet confidence, the lack of the anxious energy she must have remembered. "You look well," she offered, breaking the silence. "Thank you," he replied simply. "You too." The waitress came to take her order, providing a brief reprieve. Once she had ordered, Sarah turned back to him, fidgeting slightly with her coffee cup. "So," she began, her voice a little strained, I heard your business is doing really well. That's fantastic, Jason. Really?" He nodded, acknowledging her words. "It is. It took a lot of work, but it's thriving." "That's great," she repeated, the word sounding a little hollow. "After everything." There it was. The oblique reference to the past, the attempt to gloss over the circumstances of their separation. "After losing my job," he stated quietly, correcting her implied vagueness. "And after you left." The statement hung in the air, undeniable, uncomfortable. Sarah winced slightly. "Jason, I know that was difficult. For both of us. For me. Mostly," he corrected, his voice still quiet, rational, but firm. "You made your choice." She looked down at her hands. I was scared, Jason. Scared of the uncertainty. Scared of not having the life we had planned. "And you felt that leaving was the answer?" he asked, not with accusation, but with genuine, quiet inquiry. He wanted to hear her justification, to understand her perspective, not to forgive or forget, but simply to comprehend. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I couldn't see a way through it. Not then. And now you can?" he asked, his gaze steady, direct. She hesitated, then met his eyes. He saw a flicker of something there, perhaps regret, perhaps just the acknowledgement that her timing was revealing. I saw a mutual friend, and they mentioned how well you were doing. It made me think, maybe we could talk, see where things are." "Where things are," he repeated softly. "Things are here, Sarah. I'm here, building my life, a life you chose not to be a part of when it was difficult." The quiet directness of his words seemed to disarm her. She had perhaps expected anger, or perhaps a man desperate for her return. Instead, she found a man who was calm, centered, and utterly clear-eyed about their shared history. "Jason, I know I made a mistake," she said, finally articulating the words, though they felt a little forced. "Leaving you like that, when you were down. It was wrong." He listened, his expression unchanging. An apology, finally. It held little power over him now. The pain had faded, replaced by understanding and resilience. "It was your choice," he reiterated. "A choice with consequences, just like my choices have had consequences. Positive ones, thankfully." He gestured subtly around the busy cafe. "This life I have now, I built it in the silence you left behind, with no job, no support, and a dwindling bank account. I faced it alone." He saw the realization dawn in her eyes. She hadn't just left him. She had left him to face his lowest point entirely alone, and he had done it. He had survived, and he had thrived, not because of her, but in her absence, by relying on himself. The quiet man, who had believed in unconditional love, was gone, replaced by a silent man who understood that love was a choice, but respect was a consequence. And in this moment, sitting across from the woman who had abandoned him, he felt a profound sense of self-respect. Her return, prompted by his success, was merely an external confirmation of the internal strength he had quietly forged. The conversation with Sarah continued for a little while longer, a strained dance around the edges of their shared past and fractured present. She asked about his business, his life, her questions laced with a tentative curiosity that felt to Jason more like assessment than genuine interest. He answered politely, concisely, sharing details about his work, his focus, the quiet satisfaction he found in building something of his own. He spoke without fanfare, without seeking her approval, simply stating the facts of his rebuilt life. He noticed her subtle shifts in demeanor as he spoke, the slight widening of her eyes when he mentioned the growth of his business, the careful calibration of her responses. It was clear she was weighing his success, perhaps against the decision she had made to leave when he was at his lowest. There was a hint of regret in her expression, not necessarily for his suffering, but perhaps for the opportunity she had missed, the successful partner she had walked away from. She steered the conversation back to their relationship, tentatively exploring the possibility of reconciliation. "Jason," she said, her voice soft, a touch of nostalgia creeping in. "We had something special, didn't we, before all of it?" He looked at her, his gaze steady and clear. He saw the woman he had loved, but he also saw the woman who had abandoned him. The image of her packing her bags, the cold logic in her eyes, the quiet click of the door as she left. Those memories were etched into his mind, not with bitterness, but with the indelible clarity of a painful lesson learned. "We had a life built on certain assumptions, Sarah," he replied quietly. "Assumptions about stability, about security. When those assumptions were challenged, one of us chose to leave. I know that was hard," she conceded. "And I said I was scared. It was a difficult time." "It was," he agreed. "It was the most difficult time of my life. And I went through it alone. The person I believed would be my partner through anything wasn't there." He wasn't saying it to inflict pain, but simply stating the truth, the reality of their history as he had experienced it. He saw her flinch slightly at his directness. "I regret leaving you then, Jason," she said, her voice low. "Seeing you now, how well you've done. I realize—" She trailed off, perhaps searching for the right words, or perhaps realizing that any words she chose would sound inadequate. He finished the thought for her, quietly, rationally. "You realize that you made a choice based on circumstance, not commitment. You chose to walk away from difficulty, and I chose to face it, to rebuild, to rely on myself." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle between them. "Love, I've learned," he continued, his voice thoughtful, reflective, "is a choice, a continuous choice to support, to stand by someone, especially when things are hard. It's an active commitment. It's not just a feeling that disappears when the going gets tough." He looked at her directly. "You chose not to make that choice, Sarah. Not for me, not for us when I needed it most. That was your prerogative, but it showed me the reality of our connection." She opened her mouth to speak, but he gently, silently held up a hand. "And respect," he went on, his voice gaining a quiet strength. "Respect is a consequence. It's earned through actions, through resilience, through integrity. You don't demand it, you build it. When I lost everything, I lost respect, my job, my perceived stability, and your belief in me. But I earned it back, through the quiet work, the rebuilding, the proving to myself that I was capable. My clients respect my work. I respect the man I've become." He looked at her, his expression calm, devoid of anger or lingering desire. "Your return now when things are good, it doesn't change the fact that you left when they weren't. It reinforces the lesson I learned. You were looking for the bonus, Sarah, but you weren't there for the loss." The words hung in the air, clear and undeniable. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain. The fundamental truth of their situation and of the lesson he had learned was laid bare. Sarah's eyes welled up slightly, but Jason felt no urge to comfort her. Her tears now felt like a reaction to her own regret or realization, not a shared sorrow. "Jason," she whispered, I was hoping maybe we could try again. Now that—" He shook his head gently, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "There's nothing to try again, Sarah. The foundation isn't there anymore. It crumbled when it was tested, and I rebuilt on a different one, a stronger one, built by me, for me." He reached for his wallet. "I think we've said all there is to say." He paid for his coffee and hers. As he stood up, he looked at her one last time. "I wish you well, Sarah. Truly." He didn't wait for her response. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there amidst the quiet hum of the cafe, a figure from a past he had processed and moved beyond. Walking out into the afternoon sun, Jason felt a profound sense of peace. The encounter hadn't reopened old wounds. It had merely served as a final, quiet confirmation of the lessons he had learned. The pain of abandonment had been transmuted into strength, the chaos of loss into focused purpose. He had faced the silence of his despair, navigated the treacherous waters of addiction, and emerged a stronger, more resilient man. He thought about the title that might summarize his journey. "She left me when I lost everything, and came back when I won the bonus." The bonus wasn't a casino payout. It was the life he had built, the stability he had earned, the man he had become, and her return, prompted by that bonus, underscored the conditional nature of her attachment. He walked towards his car. The city sounds a muted backdrop to the quiet confidence he felt within. He was alone, yes, but not lonely. He was independent, self-sufficient, and grounded in a reality he had shaped with his own hands and his own resolve. He understood now, with absolute clarity, the fundamental truth forged in the crucible of his loss and solitude. Love was a choice, freely given and hopefully reciprocated, a commitment to navigate life's storms together. But respect was a consequence, earned through character, resilience, and the quiet, unwavering strength to stand on your own 2 feet, especially when the world around you crumbles. He had earned his respect, and that was a jackpot far more valuable than any casino could offer. His future stretched before him, quiet, stable, and filled with the hopeful promise of a life built on his own terms.